Okay, good morning. We are here to do the third in the part four series of African American art presented by our highly regarded St. Louis Art Museum docent, Sharon. And we're very happy to have everyone join us again. The program is being recorded. There could be questions at the end. If you want to raise your hand, that's fine, or send a note in the chat room. Dale will be happy to answer your questions at the end. And with that, Dale, I'm going to turn the program over to you so that you can say hello to everyone and take the program and run with it.
Well, good morning, everybody. I'm so glad to see you all again, except that most of the ones that I see don't have pictures. You just have your names on them, but I'm glad you're here. We have a really tight agenda today, so I want to get kind of right down to it, but I'm glad that you're all healthy and you're all here. Today, we're going to continue looking at African American artists in SLAM's permanent collection, including photographers and decorative artists, and of course, some fan favorites. Now, the photographers and decorative artists we don't see very often because basically they're not on view. So this is kind of a treat that we're able to discuss information around some of these incredible artists. You know, I just realized that today we're celebrating Juneteenth, and I think that's kind of timely, you know, for this presentation. I really didn't plan it that way, but I think it's pretty cool. At any rate, it's a good way to celebrate. So let's begin with some masterworks in contemporary Black art. Since the late 1960s, a new generation of African American artists has come of age. They were inspired by examples of leaders like Romeo Bearden and Jacob Lawrence that we talked about in our last presentation. Now, these artists used their work to make powerful statements about the Black experience in America and to experiment with exciting and innovative techniques, as we'll see. But there was this kind of balancing act between a race consciousness in art on the one hand and assimilation into white cultural mainstream on the other. And it was exemplified most emphatically in a non-figurative abstract art. But the work of these artists, decidedly expressionistic, were also at times reverential to Africa, Black America, and to the evolving civil rights movement. Some works include the Black figure and the need to acknowledge the politics of race and the interjecting of class and gender and sexuality into their art. Some are purely abstract. And these next works that we're going to see are some of my favorites. Okay, let's see if we can go on here. I must admit, I just love Willie Cole. Willie Cole collects things that most of us would be happy to clear from our garages with a good rummage sale. Dozens of bowling balls, hair dryers, waffle irons, toasters. His comfort with working with domestic devices goes back a long way. He was always the guy who fixed anything. He said, one day I looked at an iron and it was a face and was telling me that this iron was like an African mask. First, it was about domestic labor, and then it became a symbol for the Africans themselves. He used the mask to suggest the transport and branding of slaves, the domestic role of Black women, Ghanaian cloth, and Yoruba gods. This triptych that you see on the left presents two images of the artist's face, personalizing the transformation of man to mask. Willie Cole used steam irons as symbols of African American domestic workers, like his grandmother who ironed in people's homes for low wages. The iron scorch marks can also be read as ritual scarification. Cole notes that the iron is like a branding iron, and its symbol or its brand is like a tribal mark on the person or object that's branded by it. This work integrates social comment with print media. On the left is a photo etched self-portrait in brown ink. Upon this is a stamp of an iron, which gives the effect of tattooing of Africa on Cole's own face. The middle is a burning image, the scarification or brand alone devoid of human elements, perhaps even the lost kinship with Africa. The work ends with a mask, only this time upside down. The iron is made to look like an African mask made of woodcuts. It represents the wood of slave ships and wooden masks in Africa. In the sculpture Phil Here on the right, Willie Cole combines disassembled components from found steam irons to suggest a human face with eyes pointing straight ahead. Such old irons have personal resonance for Cole, whose ancestors all worked as domestic housekeepers. Cole also alludes to his more distant cultural past. The frontal orientation of this stylized space recalls the tradition of African masks. Linking humble irons to the rich set of associations, Cole's sculpture weaves together diverse issues of art, of race, and of labor. The title derives from the inscription beneath the steam iron's water intake, Fill Here. The sculpture is a steam iron spirit figure, a totem with unexpected human-like power. The resembled parts form shields or masks of figures that resemble the art of their African counterparts. So Cole is best known for sculptures like this, which assemble and transform ordinary domestic and used objects such as irons, ironing boards, high-heeled shoes, hair dryers, bicycle parts, wooden matches, and other discarded appliances and hardware. His art is an art of recognition, and yet does not let us forget that there is subjugation of others everywhere in our world. I just think it's so creative. I love Willie Cole. But I also like Martin Puryear. In the 60s, sculptures changed. Before, you had to have a theme, a story. It should probably be in bronze or marble, and it should be large to be important. But by the 60s, the artists felt anything they said was art was art. So first of all, this is a really large work. It's 7 feet tall. You can't really tell that by this photo. Martin Puryear created this work by weaving heavy rattan and building the sculpture up from its wooden base. From 1964 to 66, Puryear spent 2 years in the Peace Corps in Sierra Leone, West Africa, where he was exposed to the indigenous craft traditions of a pre-industrialized society. In his subsequent sculptures, the artist drew inspiration from the buildings and shelters of this country. But he's reduced sculpture to what it was thought to be in the 60s, the bare essence, the basic geometry and industrial manufacture that followed the precepts of minimalism. So this piece is simple and yet it's complex at the same time. Scale becomes important in his work. Inside and outside is important as the natural material, especially wood. It reminds us that basketry goes back thousands of years and continues to be integral to many pre-industrialized cultures. Baskets were used for gathering, storing, and carrying food and water and all kinds of stuff, thus accommodating the basic necessities of life. Based in outline, it resembles a flask or a gourd, yet the rattan would make it useless for carrying or holding anything. There's a hint of a skeletal system or animal skin, but no direct connection. It's in contrast with the dense, heavy rattan and its slim silhouette. It is evocative without being explicit in its sources. And in some way, his work is just weirdly beautiful. He said, I'm interested in making things rather than in making images of things. He would put things together that were so intricately crafted, but not useful, based on minimalism, but not bare bones. So he's a post-minimalist with a craftsman's soul. All right, this one I think is really incredible as well. There's a shift in the 70s and 80s with a focus on it from a focus on abstraction to historical and social and political references. And in his paintings, Glenn Ligon reproduces literary texts that often deal with race and social invisibility. Here, Ligon quoted from Mary Shelley's 19th century novel, Frankenstein, the tragic story of a human monster shunned by society because of his own physical appearance. The words read, "Sometimes I wish to express my sensations in my own mode, but the uncouth and articulate sounds which broke from me frightened me into silence again." With an oil stick, Ligon stenciled and repeated the letters, gradually obscuring the legible text into abstraction. Now, Ligon thought about art as identity construction. He began text paintings in 1988. It's an understanding of his own otherness, as he called it, how we see and who has a voice. He addresses the experience of being Black in a white society. His work combines drawing, silkscreen, and text. He makes comments about issues of African-American identity. The beauty of the surface and the silkscreening stenciled letters belies the social commentary that were embedded in the works. There's a gradual visual disintegration or disappearance of the text as you go down the text. You can see that it's very clear up here and you can't see it at all down here. It's a metaphor for the slippery nature of identity. The words get less and less visible, as do Blacks. He has used literary excerpts from James Baldwin and Frank Ellison, among others. President Obama had a piece just like this one installed in the White House, and one of his text paintings just sold for over $3 million. This is a powerful piece, and I never feel quite the same after I spend time with it. I hope you all have the same reaction when you visit it in the museum. Leonardo Drew is best known for his dynamic, large-scale sculptural installations such as this. Made in just 6 weeks, it represents textures of a city. You can look all day and never see the same thing, just like in a city. This covers an entire wall. I don't know if you can tell that. This is an entire wall of a gallery in the art museum, where Leonardo Drew arranged over 300 wooden panels covered with string and feathers and fabric and other discarded objects, which he then burned, rusted, and stained. According to Drew, his art is rooted in his experiences of living and growing up in New York City, where daily life involves navigating the city's gridded streets in organic decay. He also cites other inspirations, such as the history of African Americans in the United States and a trip to Senegal, where he visited a former slave trading post. Despite such specific sources, Drew likes to keep his work open to interpretation. He made enough of the panels to fit perfectly on a specific wall at the museum, like where you see here. But the design was also practical. By removing some of the panels, the sculpture would adjust to fit on various size walls in other locations. David Hammonds made this drawing by bouncing a basketball over the surface of the paper. To produce the smoky kind of effect that you see here, he combined charcoal with earth from Harlem, the New York neighborhood where the artist lives and works. The ball itself is placed behind the drawing, held in place between the wall and the frame. He is interested in basketball's dual role as an integral part of urban life and as a source of African American stereotypes. A basketball hoop is a light fixture that might have been seen at Versailles by David Hammonds, the one on the right, just sold for $8 million, making him one of the most expensive living Black artists today. And his sense of irony is front and center. as he sold snowballs on the streets of New York. Can you imagine? I mean, you can see him on the right selling snowballs. I think the big ones cost more than the little ones. Anyway, Hammond's process of dribbling a basketball on the paper is kind of like Pollock, who often places canvases on the studio floor to fling paint across the surface of the pictures. He transforms the energy of the street into high art. Hammond grounds the entire work in the reality of the earth, transporting the accumulated dirt into the language of abstraction. The transformative mark making is an allegory for the societal and monetary future that the sport promises marginalized communities. Furthermore, the unpredictable trajectory of the dribbled ball on the surface summons the volatile and often chance-based path of many athletes who endeavor to reach NBA fame. Hammond's first called attention to the sport's encumbered symbol of opportunity for disenfranchised African-American youth in the 1980s. Okay, so let's switch gears a little and look at some St. Louis connections. Many African Americans may have been born and raised in Missouri and have gone to school here, or they may have begun their career in St. Louis. In any case, all of them are now nationally recognized artists, and here are a few of them. You probably aren't familiar with many of their names. Brushstrokes seem to dance and vibrate on the background of Michael Marshall's pastel work on paper. Though the work's title suggests the orderliness of sheet music, Marshall filled the space with marks that move in every direction, like dissonant musical notes. His work is characterized by a preoccupation with gestural lines. The composition calls to mind the wild vibrancy of free jazz, made popular during Marshall's youth in St. Louis, with ensembles like the Black Arts Group. Another St. Louis artist is Manuel Hughes. He moved to St. Louis from Arkansas at the age of 7 and began his art education early on by taking classes at the now defunct People's Art Center in Grandel Square. He lived in North St. Louis and graduated from Soldan High School, and later earned a bachelor's and master's degree in fine arts from the University of Missouri. An academic as well as an artist, Hughes was a teacher at Pratt School of Design for more than 30 years and has artwork in collections across the country. Manuel Hughes has focused the details of draped fabrics to antique cars, to toys, to instruments and boxes. His portrayal of ordinary and mundane items create a quirky and yet unique form. Hughes splits his time between New York City and Paris, haunting antique stores and thrift shops, looking for old crates and tins and toys to use as subjects of his colorful and highly detailed still lives. Though he calls Paris home, he said that his experience in St. Louis is one that lays deep in his soul and permeates through his brush. Born in St. Louis in 1935, Oliver Jackson received an MFA from the University of Iowa in 1963. That was an era of racial, artistic, and social ferment that likely framed Jackson's sensitivity to the Black community, to the often complicated exchange between Western and African cultures, into abstract expressionism. His work lies somewhere in that mix. In the 1960s, Jackson worked with other St. Louis musicians, actors, dancers, poets, and visual artists in the Black Artists Group, or BAG, Black Artists Group, exposing underprivileged Black communities to the richness of Black arts beyond easy popular entertainment. Jackson taught at California State University for many years and now lives and works in Oakland, California. There's an African tradition of mixed media in much of his work, where any materials, rags, metal, paint can be used. He's known as a highly experimental artist working across a range of media. Race is not his theme. Art is his theme. He said, "I am a Black person making art quite seriously, and that is very different from being a Black political artist." John Roselle was born in St. Louis, Missouri, and holds a BFA with a major in painting and a minor in sculpture from Washington University and an MFA from Fonfon. Roselle is currently tenured associate professor in the drawing and painting department at the School of the Art Institute in Chicago. Here in the piece on the left, Roselle references the haunting effects of apartheid and colonialism in South Africa. The image shows two Black African protesters, kind of hard to make out, dragging the broken body of a wounded comrade. Gold is sprinkled throughout the white-on-white image to symbolize an earlier policy of political and economic injustice and racial segregation driven by money and power. The work on the right is the smallest work in our collection. It's about 2 inches by 3 inches. Philip J. Hampton explored the effects and conditions of a variety of materials for over 60 years. With roots in realism, Hampton moved into abstraction in the 1970s. Informed by his studies of art and cultural history, he's applied a wealth of aesthetic ideas in his works, including elements of visual languages employed by the ancient Greeks, European old masters, and African and Asian artists. He was born in Kansas City. He was an Army veteran, and he worked on a Kansas City newspaper as a commercial artist. Hampton taught at SIU Edwardsville, where he taught printmaking, design, and painting, and participated in wider economic community, curating exhibitions, leading workshops, and giving lectures and writing articles. Hampton found that abstraction freed him to break free of representational constraints. With abstraction, he could address philosophical concerns without being bound to specific narratives or didactic ideas. It was a way for artists to navigate into the mainstream of the art world. Hampton suggests the great Egyptian government minister, architect, physician, and priest, Imhotep, in this work. The washes of blue and streaks of gold evoke the waters of the Nile and the colors of the water lily, which symbolizes Upper Egypt. The floral symbolism is carried throughout the painting in stylized water lilies that float across the painting surface in overlapping grids. Hampton's use of grids honors Imhotep's legacy as a great architect. In this series, he combined paintings and collage and drew on Egyptian symbols, but also integrated gridded elements and abstract expressionist markings. Throughout his career, Hampton also took an active role in the promotion of African-American artists, writing catalogs and articles and organizing a number of survey exhibitions on the theme. A founding member of the National Conference of Artists, a group that support African-American artists, is still active today. Gerald Eanes is from St. Louis, went to Parkway and to Flow Valley. He has found his own personal minimalist language and claims his classroom was the St. Louis Art Museum. This painting is one of Eanes' distinctive signature style. Romeo Blues consists of dark blue ovals that appear to float within a hazy light blue field. The opacity of the ellipses contrasts with the translucence of the background. Eanes achieves this effect by pouring, it's kind of a crazy way that he does it, with glue and all kinds of layered paint and thicknesses to get this mottled atmospheric effect. It kind of looks like clouds. Through his investigation of color, shape, and materials, Eanes explores his signature style of abstraction. So I think now if we look at photographers in the collection, you might be more familiar with more of them, and especially you might recognize some of their photographs. African-American photographers have used their cameras as the tools of social commentary and personal exploration. Acquired by the museum beginning in 1988, the images bear powerful witness to changes in America over the span of the 20th century. These artists' names are probably unfamiliar, but some of their photographs are iconic and certainly recognizable, and each are considered some of the most influential contemporary American artists. They've investigated family relationships, cultural identity, sexism, class, political systems, and the consequences of power. So let's look at several of them. Carrie Mae Weems was trained as both a dancer and photographer before enrolling in folklore studies program at the University of California, Berkeley in the mid-'80s, after which she began placing herself in her photographic compositions in an attempt to create in the work the simultaneous feeling of being in it and of it. She has since called this recurring figure an alter ego muse and witness to history, who can stand in for both the artist and the audience. I think it's very important, she said, that a Black woman, that is engaged with the world around her. The Black woman is engaged with history. She's engaged with looking, with being. She's a guide into circumstances seldom seen. In her 1990 kitchen table series, Weems, or rather her protagonist, inhabits the same intimate domestic interior throughout the series. In 1989, she set up her camera every day in her kitchen in front of a simple wooden table, illuminated by a single overhead light. And from that table, a fictional life unfolds, and with Weems playing the lead role. Weems said she remembers Saturday night hair fryings every week, just like the one in our photograph. Till this day, she said, I still have nightmares about the hot comb. I remember Mama would tell me to hold my ear down, and my body would just recoil, bracing for my skin's possible kiss with a 400-degree iron. Honey, let me tell you, it's a brave girl who submits the nape of her neck to that fire. As barbaric as this nighttime ritual of singed hair may seem to some, it is the tenderness of the scene that has left its indelible mark. The kitchen is a place to be burned, but it is a space to be healed as well. In this image from the kitchen table series, Carrie Mae Weems gives viewers the privilege to witness this remarkable, ordinary, extraordinary ritual. Playing that every woman we have all been at one time or another, the photographer herself sits in a black slip, cigarette just a dangling, head cocked to the side, seeking solace against the belly of a kitchen beautician. Is it a sister, a mama, an aunt, a lover, whoever we imagine? This image of blissful domestic intimacy reminds us of all women who offered an ear as a cup for our tears. The beautician's chair in that kitchen was a healing throne, fixing food, fixing hair, fixing poor souls. The series is not limited to a particular perspective. I think the series is important in relationship to the Black experience, but it's not about race, Weems said. I think that most work that's made by African-American artists is considered to be about Blackness, unlike work that's made by white artists, which is assumed to be universal at its core. But everyone can relate to this work, she said. It's not just Black women, it's white women, Asian women. Men can see the women in their lives, memories from their childhood, or scenes from their marriage or their family life. So in its own way, it is universal. And yet representation like this one is so rare. Monetta Sleep Jr. is the photographs are all should be in our minds, I think, pretty something that we all really recognize. It's 50 years since photographer Monetta Sleep became the first African-American to win a Pulitzer Prize for journalism. While Monetta Sleep may be remembered now mostly for his images of the civil rights movement, in his 41 years at Ebony magazine, he photographed almost every aspect of the Black experience in the United States. His early assignments included photographing prison inmates on death row, a hospital in Harlem, and a beauty contest. He shot nearly every Black celebrity from the 1960s to the early 90s, and traveled widely in Africa, photographing the countries newly freed from colonial rule. Mr. Sleet worked for a Black publisher whose primary objectives was to cover the achievements and concerns of Black America. Being a Black journalist in the 20th century made it impossible to remain an impartial observer. There was a story that he was telling, but he wanted to tell a story from his perspective, from the perspective as a Black man in America. He said that he had a point of view, and he wanted to represent that point of view with his camera lens. And I think that informed a lot of his photography and a lot of his journalism and a lot of his art throughout his career. One of Sleet's many assignments was to cover Dr. Martin Luther King. Sleet reported on the Montgomery bus boycott in 1955, King's acceptance of the Nobel Peace Prize in 1964, Selma to Montgomery March in 1965, and he was given access to the King family at home. Sleet and King formed a bond that lasted until King's death in 1968. Following the assassination of Dr. King, Sleet photographed King's funeral on April 9th in Atlanta in Ebenezer Baptist Church. The following year, Sleet's image of the grieving Coretta Scott King won the Pulitzer Prize for feature photography. This made Sleet the first Black man to receive a Pulitzer Prize in any field and the first person to win an award while working for a Black publication. In this photograph, time seems to stand still as a father playfully throws his child into the air. The child appears to hover in midair, an effect heightened by the way the horizon is so low. The photograph was taken during a 10-year project in which photographer Stephen Mark traveled through the United States, the Caribbean, Europe, and Africa, photographing the legacy of the slave trade. Showing only the hands of a man holding an infant, Roy de Carava suggests the complex and layered relationships that exist between parent and child. This image focuses on geometric shapes that comprise the composition. Wonderful patterns of shadow and light emerge in the interplay of the man's large, dark hands around his son's light-colored outfit, creating a rhythm that kind of leads the viewer's eye through the composition. Now, David Lee is the younger brother of film director Spike Lee, and he's done the still photography for most of his older brother's feature films. This photograph was taken on Malcolm X Boulevard in Bedford-Stuyvesant neighborhood of New York City. The juxtaposition of the elderly man with the Malcolm X sign partially peeled from the door invites reflection of the progress of race relations and the civil rights in the United States 40 years after the Civil Rights Movement. The photograph was included in Songs of My People, a project and exhibition that documented African-American life in America. Carl Pope's work addresses issues related to race in America, specifically the social conditions of African Americans. He also made artworks that address the AIDS epidemic and other social and political issues in the United States. Pope juxtaposes individual photographs that are steeped in metaphoric suggestions to communicate the condition of the African American community. He uses images to suggest a narrative about the experience of the African American male. Powerful imagery suggests the myth of a Black man as coming from the soil, rising through life, yet still oppressed by the symbolic white figure. This photograph is from his classroom series. It features a lecture hall and a traditional collegiate classroom with horizontal chalkboards and a periodic chart marking the front of the room. His work represents sites of memories, images with personal and cultural history that we all remember. The heritage of these schools is questionable in a country where access to schooling is not universally equal. Education implies social and economic privilege for some and lack of it for others. It deals with the politics of class and race within American society. A child of the 50s in the segregated South, Bernie Imes embraced photography as part of a means to explore the social facets of the community from which he lived in his youth. Initially, Eames' subjects were the people themselves, the occupants of that culture. His subsequent photographs of local juke joints, however, in many ways address the culture directly. Ramshackle building is sparsely furnished, spontaneously decorated and accessorized with handwritten menus, advertisements, and admonishments take on an aggregate personality more vivid than any single customer. For more than 20 years, Bernie Imes rode the countryside of his native Mississippi, photographing the people and places he encountered along the way. Working in both black, white, and color, Bernie Imes' photography takes viewers inside these juke joints and dilapidated restaurants that are scattered across our landscape. There, Bernie Imes introduces the viewer to, as one writer puts it, the characters and locales that linger in the images of many Southern culture and memory. So now let's take a quick look at decorative arts. African-American decorative arts embrace many forms, from practical utility of bed quilts and baskets to the traditional crafts and blacksmithing and wood carving to the skill in design and construction of residential architecture or furniture. Whether the objects are practical or beautiful, the artistic creations are based on decades of learned tradition. African-American traditions continue to thrive in decorative arts, while allowing artists to rely on improvisation to guide their creations. 21st century artists produce creations using the traditional techniques of their ancestors, while allowing contemporary style to influence the design and form. The St. Louis Art Museum recently purchased a large stoneware storage jar signed and dated by David Drake in 1857. Ceramics made by the enslaved African-American potter are highly sought after, and the acquisition of such a work has been a long-standing aspiration for the museum. Drake was born into slavery in South Carolina in about 1801. Over his lifetime, he labored in several potteries in the area, then a center of stoneware production. He produced utilitarian jugs, pitchers, and jars that were used to store plantation-produced foodstuffs. Drake is recognized for his skill as a potter and for his ability to read and write at a time when anti-literacy laws were common in states where slavery was legal. The largest known vessels made by Drake measure more than 2 feet in height and hold over 20 gallons. Drake inscribed his name below the date on the jar and added 10 dots to indicate the 10-gallon capacity. The initials LM refer to his owner and the proprietor of the plantation where he labored until emancipation. Scholars have identified 270 ceramic works that bear his signature and date. He inscribed these ceramics at a time and place where literacy among slave people could be severely punished. In that light, his monumental pots with his signatures are defiant expressions of literacy and authorship and creativity in the face of slavery. I don't know if you've heard of Gee's Bend in Alabama, but the community of Gee's Bend in Alabama is populated by the descendants of African-American slaves. And since the 19th century, has been the source of some of the most inventive and spectacular American quilts. Just southwest of Selma in the Black Belt of Alabama, Gee's Bend is an isolated rural community of about 700 inhabitants. The area is named after Joseph Gee, a landowner who came from North Carolina and established a cotton plantation in 1816 with 17 slaves. After emancipation, many freed slaves and family members stayed on the plantation as sharecroppers. And during the latter half of the Great Depression, the inhabitants of the area faced challenges and farming practices became increasingly mechanized. And consequently, a large portion of the community left. However, many inhabitants stayed on, and they developed the quilting collective. For many years, the only money earned in Gee's Bend was by quilting. The quilting tradition in Gee's Bend goes back, as I said, to the 19th century, and may have been influenced in part by patterned African textiles. African American women pieced together strips of cloth to make bed covers. Throughout the post-Belle years and into the 20th century, Gee's Bend women made quilts to keep themselves and their children warm in their unheated shacks that lacked running water, telephones, or electricity. Along the way, they developed a distinctive style, noted for its lively improvisations and geometric simplicity. This could also have been influenced by the isolation of their location, which necessitated using whatever materials were on hand, often recycling old clothing and textiles. No two quilts are exactly the same. After the Civil War, sewing machines were mostly used. The patterns are pulsating, kind of an action of color. This quilt was made by Lucy Mingo. She grew up picking crops, cooking for her family, and walking 4 miles to and from school each day. Her father worked as a longshoreman in Mobile. Mingo married her husband, David, in 1949, and together they raised 10 children. In 1965, she joined Dr. Martin Luther King on a march to Selma, and also bravely registered to vote in Camden, Alabama, with other residents of Gee's Bend. In contrast to the formal geometry of traditional quilts, the quilters of Gee's Bend are inspired by the weathered buildings, broken paths, and rambling fences of the isolated area, and create vivid abstract works that echo the energy of Alabama jazz. Their works have been showcased in museums and hailed as miraculous works of modern art. Sir David Frank Adjay is a designer of this chair. He was Ghanaian British architect who created a mark in the architectural world through his sensitive, culturally responsible, and global architecture. Having lived across various countries before finally settling in London, Adjay's childhood exposed him to diverse cultures in the architecture of varied regions. Due to his father's career as a diplomat, he traveled extensively in Africa and the Middle East as a child, and that allowed him to develop a heightened degree of cultural sensitivity, which exposed him to a variety of architectural styles. He has particularly cited his travels as being the influence to his approach to design. In 2000, he set up his own practice in London, New York, Ghana, and Berlin. In 2017, he was knighted for his services to architecture. Adjay has also designed textiles inspired by desert landscapes in the rock architecture of Petra, and designed an open-ended furniture system based on the language of form rather than technical detail, just like this chair here. It's called the Washington Furniture Collection, and he navigated into other design fields other than just architecture and furniture design. He served as an architect for the National Museum of African American History in Washington, D.C. I hope some of you have seen it. It's just incredible. So he was the major architect there. And the chair kind of resembles the structure and decoration of that museum's exterior. It pays homage to the artistry of African American metalsmiths through the choice of material cast aluminum, and echoes African textile patterns. African American artistic talent expressed itself more often in metalwork than any other trade except carpentry. Unlike fabric and cloth handcrafts, which were passed down among the females, Metalwork was the only craft passed down by males from generation to generation. So basketball player Stephen Curry created sneakers influenced by Adjay's museum and furniture design. Is he the one that just won the, some Curry just won? He was the one? Okay. So let's now finish this series today with a look at women activists. In postmodern era of the 90s, the dominance of Black female artists came to fore. Black women artists gained recognition for their work in a way that Black women hadn't done before. Today, African-American women can be found exhibited around the world. In 1990, Lorna Simpson was the first Black woman to present art at the Venice Biennale, allowing the most marginalized of people in the United States, Black women, to take center stage as the world looked on. Every odd-numbered year, more than 500,000 culture vultures descend on Venice to visit the Art Biennale, the art show on which other biennales are based. Artists, curators, collectors, and art lovers gather to see new work by their chosen artists. And during the 1990s, more Black women artists than ever were accepted into the mainstream of the art world, allowing them exposure and thus the compensation to create lives as full-time artists. Many artists resurfaced with a renewed sense of racial solidarity and political insurgency during the Black arts movement. All a younger generation of Black women artists, creating works that underscored their shared interest in African design sensibilities, the Black figure, and the continuing struggle for civil rights. These next works are a few of the many African-American printmakers and photographers and artists who have come into prominence in the last 20 to 30 years, women who have focused on the African-American experience. A 1980 graduate of Carnegie Mellon University, Renee Stout's career began with photorealist paintings of everyday urban neighborhoods. Soon she developed mystical interests, delving into kind of ancient African traditions and magic, and of course, her vivid imagination. She explores rituals and customs of her Haitian lineage in her work. In this seemingly surreal narrative composed of 6 prints, Renee Stout photographs herself in the guise of Urzuli, a Haitian spirit based on the Yoruba goddess of love. Stout's silhouette evokes the sense of Urzuli as an unattainable object of desire as she presents herself in an intensely red setting surrounded by lavish objects. In the story, she mourns the loss of a potential lover. Although Stout is known for her sculptures that include references to religion, especially religion of the diaspora, this series is her first use of photography as her primary medium. It's known as a short story. She says it is a metaphor about experience. As an artist, activist, and children's author, Faith Ringgold, who was born in 1930 in Harlem, has challenged perceptions of African-American identity and gender inequality for over 5 decades. Growing up in the creative and intellectual context of the Harlem Renaissance, she is widely recognized for her painted story quilts, combining personal narrative, history, and politics to tell my story, or more to the point, she said, my side of the story, as an African-American woman. Faith Ringgold has worked in a variety of media and modes, from quilts and paintings to performance and children's books, to depict the African-American experience. She made her first quilt, Echoes of Harlem, in 1980 in collaboration with her mother. These works weave images and text in the tradition of quilting passed on through the female line of her family from her great-great-grandmother, who was born into slavery. From Harlem rooftops and jazz clubs to a graffiti-filled New York subway and radical biography of Aunt Jemima, the face of a pancake mix brand, Ringgold's affirmative quilts celebrate a myriad of culture and life. This painted quilt tells a story of a fictional African-American artist living in France in the 1920s, a Black woman who is master of her own destiny. Through Willa, artist Faith Ringgold reshaped the past to redress the absence of the Black figure in art history. In panels of text along the top and bottom of the quilt, Willa explains that she's painting a portrait of the famous St. Louis-born dancer, Josephine Baker. She celebrated Black heroines and heroes like Jo Baker. This was her universe of subjects, celebrating Black life. In the background at the right is a section of French artist Matisse painting, Harmony in Red. She said that she always wanted to paint a beautiful woman reclining like a Matisse model. Her beauty was not a vulnerability, but an inner force. Regarding her choice of the quilt as a medium, Ringgold said, "Feminist art is soft. It's soft art, lightweight art, sewing art. Women's art is less rigid and it's open to all kinds of new innovations. Her quilt narratives are so popular, they're now produced in a series of books and videos." Using racist images like sambos and minstrels, a new generation of Black artists has been stirring up controversy. Kara Walker is one of them. Some have labeled her work as rubbing history the wrong way. There have been many artists who have focused on this theme, but Walker focuses on one key historical period, the antebellum South, and one medium, the cut paper panorama, to isolate a realm of violence and the burden of slavery in this country. Kara Walker is among the most complex and prolific American artists of her generation. She's gained national and international recognition for her cut paper black and white silhouette works that invoke themes of African American racial identity. She exposes and confronts cultural taboos, racial stereotypes, and slurs head on in her running tableau dramas that float across the white paper. Here, images of an alienated spirit or a free-floating African-American woman, powerful within herself, comes to mind. Now, this one is much less direct than most of her other images. Her subjects, often scenes of slavery, conflict, or violence, are rendered in a style that references the art of the paper cutout silhouettes, as you can see here. That was a popular hobby in 19th century households. The painting of this genteel art form with disturbing imagery produces a forceful picture that finds tensions between the playful feeling of the silhouettes and the upsetting details found within. The silhouettes technique has its roots in the sentimental Victorian ladies' arts of shadow portraits. Lorna Simpson's art examines how perception of identity is tied to appearance. However, her works often do not include any figure in the traditional sense. Wigs in 1994 eliminates not only the face, but the entire body. Instead, she presents us with an array of wigs, which act as stand-ins or surrogates for the figure. She references the body without including it. I think it's really cool. I love this piece. Wigs is a collection of hair pieces depicting everything from afros and braided hair to blonde locks and doll wigs. The 21 panels of wigs and smaller text panels are printed on felt, itself a material with kind of hair-like texture. Affixed to the wall, Simpson's work often investigates the history of African-American hairstyles and conventions of beauty. Wigs also features quotes from historical accounts or proverbs that deal with appearances, including things like that clothes make the man, or what you see is what you get, or if the shoe fits, wear it. And so Lorna Simpson uses popular phrases from everyday life with iconic visual images to examine issues of race and gender identity. Using linguistic word plays and simplified, unidentified figures, such as the woman whose back is turned to the viewer. Simpson creates a series of scenarios in the viewer's mind. She considers the notion of African American women being invisible and alludes to their role as survivors through the use of text, gesture, and wigs. Many artists were dedicated to attacking stereotypes in Black art. They attacked the image of Black domestic myth and turned these stereotypes into power and self-assertion. Betty Saar was a leader in that assertion. The civil rights movement was at a fevered pitch at that time, and she was also tied to the feminist movement. These works have a coded quality to them. Betty Saar is a true icon within the contemporary art sphere, creating pieces that addressed race and Black consciousness. After the assassination of Dr. King in '68, her work becomes overtly political and extreme. During the 1970s, Saar was a member of the Black arts movement, composed of poets, writers, performers, and artists who merged activism and art to give voice to the Black experience. Her most famous work, The Liberation of Aunt Jemima in 1972, features a mammy doll armed with a rifle and grenade, ready to fight against the prejudice, physical violence, and disparaging stereotypes imposed upon African Americans. Our print is powerful. The Fragility of Smiles is a serograph that she printed to represent the schematic placement of slaves as they were shipped as cargo from one country to another. In her pieces, the ship always means slave ships. She's focusing on the damp, quite tight quarters of a slave ship. So historical reality, but emotional feeling of suffocation and density of people. On these ships, there was no communication with different languages and cultures next to one another. In such a place, the fragility of shared emotions existed. Humanity still existed, but it was fragile. The color of the paper leads us to think of depression, but also the sea. It's estimated that 100 million slaves were brought to this country in ships like this. It was a commercial enterprise, and the conditions in sheer numbers led to horror and harshness. Does the title, think about this and we'll talk about it later. Does the title soften the reality of what you're looking at? Is a smile a metaphor for life? Does beauty soften the blow? Is the edginess gone? Or is it more shocking with the beauty of the paper and the design? Throughout her work, Saar was teaching us to re-examine our beliefs. Allison Saar credits as her mother, Betty Saar, the one we just talked about, with exposing her to metaphysical and spiritual traditions. Assisting her father, Richard Saar, a painter and art conservator in his restoration shop, inspired her learning and curiosity about other cultures. She merges Western mythology with African American history by retelling the story of the Greek hero Ulysses and the sirens, using a figure whose bound feet evoke the horrific practice of lynching. The stoic figure hangs below two jeering faces, recalling Ulysses, who strapped himself to the mast of a ship, risking his life to hear the alluring song of the seductive sea nymphs. Saar's work is informed by the carved forms and vibrant colors of African, Caribbean, and Latin American folk arts. In this print, she uses the woodcut technique, a two-dimensional complement to the life-size wooden figures for which she is primarily known. Our second to last work is by Micheline Thomas. She creates vibrant portraits and detailed interiors that examine how the representation of women in popular culture informs our definition of femininity. Thomas holds a BFA from Pratt Institute and an MFA from Yale, and works in photography, video, sculpture, and installations. In this photograph, Micheline Thomas captured the strength of the woman's gaze, the halo of her dark hair and her made-up lips, The vibrant patterns of her dress and the wall texture background complement her features. The model Din was a medical student who regularly posed for Thomas, yet the portrait depicts a character created by the artist through her staging of the setting and costume. Her title, French for Din, a very beautiful Black woman, acknowledges an earlier era with the use of its historically charged term, Negresse. In particular, Thomas references images of Black women, Black beauty, found in popular media. Lastly, Ellen Gallagher lives and works in New York and Rotterdam in the Netherlands. From the outset of her career, Gallagher has brought together non-representational images and charged figuration in paintings. Since 2001, Gallagher has continued to add to her watery ecstatic series, which consists of assorted drawings of marine life, some scientific and other imagery. And in our print, an octopus-like sea creature is painted in watercolor and pencil on a piece of cut paper. The series recalls the myth Drexia, a Black Atlantis at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. In the story, the aquatic world is populated by the children of West African women who were pregnant when cast overboard during the transatlantic slave trade. Through Gallagher's persistent markings, botanical and biological marine life suggests a utopian realm rather than a horrific one. So I think you can see that there's just an incredible variety of artists that we have been looking at. Again, I want to thank you for joining us. And you can see that the number of African-American artists in slam is just mind-boggling. I hope I've tweaked your interest in seeing some of the artists that you were probably unfamiliar with before. And remember, you can make an appointment to see any prints or drawings or photograph in the print and study room. Just call the main number, it's 721-0072, and ask for the prints, drawings, and photographs department. Make an appointment anytime, and they'll take any of these pieces out for you to see. So next month, we'll continue with the artists in the permanent collection, some more fan favorites, and a focus on the Ali collection. We'll also look at the influence of African art on contemporary Western art. You know, I've always wanted to talk about this subject, and this seems like a perfect time. So do we have any questions or comments, or do you want to talk about how you felt about this piece, which I think is something that is really different than most. Generally, the pieces that are this powerful are pretty much in your face. And yet this one, I think, has a beauty and a softness of its own. So anybody want to mention? We can unmute people and anybody can talk or ask questions or answer this one.
Does anyone have a comment or a question? Well, Dale, maybe I could comment a little bit. I find it so, like, I think you used the word soft, and the blue background, you know, to me evokes the ocean and a floating vessel, and the contrast with the horror of what was actually happening. It's pretty jarring. Pretty jarring, and it's more jarring because it is so subtle.
Yeah, I think it's an amazing piece.
Yeah, it's and the collection of images you brought today, it's really very comprehensive and insightful. Lots of different types, you know, of art, and like you said, some are more practical than others. But the emotions tied to these, it's very strong. The emotions are so strong.
They really are. And I think that the materials that were used are so different. I love Willie Cole and the iron. I mean, I just think that's so creative. I love that. I don't know. I mean, it's not really a lighthearted piece, and yet it makes me smile every time I see it. In comparison with the Glenn Ligon piece, which is the story of Frankenstein, that one just affects me every time I read it. It's and look at it. It's so they're all powerful in their own way, and I think they each talk to us in different ways. We all react to them in different ways. Was there anything that you? Yeah.
I think Susan has a question. Go ahead, Susan.
Yeah, actually, when I saw this, when I saw the picture of the iron, I thought about this because I've seen this picture in books about the history of the Middle Passage, and not this art piece, but the actual drawing of the hull of the ship. And I thought that iron actually kind of evoked that iron face with some of the markings there. Also, I thought of something else. I don't know if people are familiar with the Griot Museum in St. Louis, but the Griot Museum has a live reconstruction of the hold of a slave ship, showing the niches into which people were placed, and it's very, very moving. Highly recommend visiting that museum. The whole museum.
Where is it?
The Griot Museum is in North St. Louis off of Jefferson Avenue. And it's been the work of one particular person, Lois Conley, who single-handedly learned how to make wax figures and produced most of the figures that are in the museum. But it's a history of essentially related to St. Louis, but not entirely. I mean, there's a lot of a general history of slavery, but I really recommend it. It's not open every day. You have to make an appointment sometimes to get in there, but there are certain days it's open to the public. So
thank you for that.
And I have a question. So most of the pieces you showed us, and we've seen several of them on display, like the Faith Ringgold, but what numbers of them are on display? You said the prints, you have to get a appointment, but are most of the other pieces on display in the museum somewhere?
No.
No, okay. There's been no complete.
There are quite a number right now that are on display, which is, I think fitting with the focus of most museums today. But a lot of these are fragile. And so they, like any kind of textile, you won't see it. You'll see it maybe every 10, 15 years. After that, they go back into storage.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the larger pieces, like the one by Leonardo Drew, is just, it's difficult to install and take down. So they,
That's the wall. Is that the wall?
That's the wall. Some of the, pieces like the piece by, here, I can get some of these up for you.
That's okay.
Willie Cole is not up. The Charm of Subsistence is not out at the moment, but it usually comes out. It's in and out. This one is out right now. This one is not. Don't you think he's a king? Can you imagine selling snowballs? I mean, who would think to do that, and who would buy them?
Yeah. There is a Glenn Ligon, I don't know if that's the right, at the Kemper at WashU, right now on the lower level. We were just there Sunday. There's some interesting pieces in there that are by Black artists as well. So
yeah, I was just trying to split some of these up. I think this one is up by Oliver Jackson is up right now. Obviously none of the photographs are. This piece is, since it's new, it'll always be out. This piece will always be out. It's pretty incredible that he didn't, that was pretty brave. Can you imagine? I mean, it was illegal to show that you could read. I thought that was pretty incredible.
Yeah.
These are basically prints all the ones by, by, this one is a textile. These are all, you can see these in the prints and drawings room. They're prints and photographs, so they're not out. I think some of the ones we saw last month, like the one by Carrie James Marshall or Cole Scott, those are out. And those will probably, they're out a lot. So is the one by, let's see, I'm trying to remember which ones. Let me go back up and see if I can find their, which ones I'm here. We've got the one by Kahinda Wiley is up. The Cole Scott is up. Blackburn is that, those are prints, so they're, you have to ask to see those. But Carrie James Marshall is up, and Couture is up. These are upstairs. These are not downstairs. These are all up. These are in the galleries right now. All of these. We looked at these, I think, the first or second month. Yeah, these are all up. So, oh, and these new ones are out now. This one is out. This one is out. I mean, you just kind of have to wander through and see. They haven't set up, they don't have a gallery that's called African American Art. So you just have to kind of wander around and look for them.
Thank you. The last question, we were unable to attend the second program. Is that available on recording if we wanted to watch it?
Yes, we can send you I'll mark it down right now. I'll send it to you.
I could, let's see, I can email. It's Susan Williams. You've got me on the list.
Okay.
I think when you changed the date on that, we had another appointment or something.
Yeah, sorry about that, guys.
No, well, that's all right. It happens.
Yeah.
It's been a wonderful series, though. Thank you.
Well, I'm glad you've enjoyed it. I've found that I've learned a lot. So, I think it is pretty amazing. There are so many. There really are. And they're pretty incredible. Next month, we'll see a bunch more. So thank you all very much for joining us. Happy Juneteenth. And I'll see you in July.
Thank you, Dale, very much.
Thank you. It was really great, Dale. Thanks as usual.
Thank you.
I think the ship is being archaeology, I guess, sea archaeologists. I think the ship is now they found it and they're going through it. And I'm pretty sure it could be this particular ship that they did find this recently. And we'll get more history from that, that's for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Dale.
Okay, thank you all.
All right, bye. Thanks.
Next month.